Good morning on this Sunday, August 22nd, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Governor Kemp has a message for local government officials who want to go back into lockdown mode as COVID cases continue to rise. Also, Georgia Republicans go after Democrats over the Afghanistan crisis, and the Atlanta City Council tables the vote on a police training facility. Phil, Theron, Kathy, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Kemp comes down on local officials who want to impose more COVID restrictions on businesses.
There are some across our state who want to go back into lockdown mode. They want to close businesses, enact new restrictions, and force businesses to upend their operations.
Governor Brian Kemp signed an executive order that prevents local elected officials from forcing businesses to enact COVID restrictions, including vaccine and mask mandates. He says businesses could still choose to enact restrictions, but shouldn't be forced to do so.
I trust hardworking Georgians to know what is best for themselves, their families, and their employees.
In a tweet, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms posted a picture of the governor with a caption saying, "The gift that keeps on giving." Phil, we'll start with you this week. Do you think this was a necessary move by the governor?
I do think Governor Kemp is correct not to have any lockdowns. In fact, he does deserve credit in 2020 and into this year for trying to keep our economy going while trying to follow health safety protocols and trying to respect local control over local affairs. I do think, though, even since we debated this last week, that the cases have risen over 1 million cases. And I think that, and actually Theron mentioned this last week, and I agree, I think that the
we just lost Phil there for a second. Kathy, I'll ask you. Mayor Bottoms and Savannah Mayor Van Johnson doubled down on their restrictions. Just want to get your thoughts.
Well, I think if it comes down to a court challenge, the governor may be in the losing position again. And, this just doesn't contribute anything to solving the problem, right? He's just playing politics all over again with people's lives. And what we should be talking about is how do we kind of throttle up and throttle down our prevention activities so that we can stop this. It doesn't stop at borders, doesn't stop at schools. We're doing a horrible job. The governor's doing a horrible job, and he needs to take a different approach and quit playing politics with this pandemic.
Well, as Phil mentioned this week, Georgia hit a COVID milestone with its 1 millionth case since the beginning of the pandemic. Governor Kemp says state offices will be closed the Friday before Labor Day to encourage state employees to get their COVID shots. But we also saw some success this week in DeKalb County, where they gave out $100 gift cards to those who showed up to get a COVID shot. And there was a huge turnout. Martha, let me ask you, should counties and even the state follow suit?
Yeah, what we need to be doing is encouraging people to get the vaccine and getting more people to be vaccinated. We can't do that by forcing people into certain behaviors. We've seen that already. And look, I am all about the science. I spend time reading journals and looking at all of this kind of stuff. But the problem we're having is whether it's President Biden talking about booster shots, the CDC's talking about masks on kids, or other things, they are announcing these things and releasing the data sometimes weeks or even a month later. So you don't have the science to back up what they're saying, and that's a big problem. So the way we're going to get around this, you get more flies with honey, you've got to get people vaccinated and encourage them to do it. Then we'll be in a better place to where the COVID vaccine is in the group of vaccines that you have to decide to get every year because we've gotten control of this. There's been no transmission in restaurants. It's been like 1.3%. There's been almost no transmission outside. It's in close gatherings with people that are staying inside their homes have the greatest level of transmission if you look at the data. That's what we need to do. They say they want to follow the science. They're not doing it.
So Theron, is the way to incentivize folks is to pay them to get these COVID vaccines?
Yes, and I agree with Martha. You want to basically give the honey to catch the flies, and the honey, Lori, is the money. I recently read this week in the New York Times that 30% of the people who are unvaccinated said that they would actually get the vaccination shots if they were incentivized. And so I think what you saw in DeKalb County this week was a tremendous amount of leadership and innovation to encourage people to get the vaccine shots. I just believe that the more people who have the vaccine, the safer we are. And then lastly, Lori, really quickly, I think to respond to your question about local governments is that I don't think any mayor around the state of Georgia is attacking businesses and want businesses to shut down. They had to put these mask mandates in place because they are responsible for local enforcement. What I think is going to be interesting is that what the governor said and the mayor and of the cities are saying is now it's left up to the restaurants to decide how they want to enforce masks inside of their restaurants. So I just want to push back a little bit on this narrative that Democratic mayors across the state of Georgia are trying to shut down businesses. That's just not true.
Kathy, you had your hand up.
Well, I just don't want to let it go without mentioning this 4-day weekend that the governor is giving state employees as some sort of incentive to get vaccinated is not going to work. It's just ridiculous. What he could do to get more state employees vaccinated is to provide vaccines at the workplace and tell all those employees that by October 1st they need to be vaccinated or go find another job.
All right, I want to move on. Oh, go ahead, Martha.
Well, just one point, the governor, we are back to unemployment rates that are pre-pandemic levels. The governor's managed the economy. He has given great direction. He has not been a failure in this. And we are going to see the great results as time goes on.
All right, I want to move on from COVID because I know we'll be talking about it, unfortunately, for the next few months. But this week, new federal officials released data on Georgia saying that Georgia has one of the highest voter registration rates in the country. 95% of Georgians over the age of 18 have signed up to vote. Phil, your thoughts on this because Stacey Abrams is getting a lot of the credit.
Well, yes, I think both parties deserve credit for targeting and micro-targeting and trying to figure out who their voters are to get them out. I think that the fact that when you get your driver's license, you can get a voter registration has helped a lot. That started under Governor Deal and has continued. And it really puts the lie to this myth of voter suppression. I mean, when you talk about these numbers, more people are being registered, and the national media especially misses that point deliberately most of the time.
Darren?
I think a lot of people deserve credit for the increase of voter registration, but let's be honest. I mean, on the Democratic side, Stacey Abrams, along with a lot of other people, have been registering voters for years in Georgia. And I think, you got to give former Governor Deal some credit, too. I mean, he put in the law that basically said if you choose to register to vote when you get your driver's license, people could do that. But I think ultimately this favors the Democrats because what we saw in elections all across the country and in Georgia is that we did extremely well with young voters between the ages of 18 and 29. And so we just got to make sure that we continue to galvanize them and educate them and hopefully get them to vote Democrat.
Kathy, what do you think about Phil's point about voter suppression? Like, how can you have voter suppression when you have a 95% voter registration rate?
Well, for the most part, when we're talking about voter suppression, we're really talking about the obstacles that are being put up that are making it more difficult for people to vote. And those are the things that are really on the front burner right now. Now, we've also, had some times when we've made it difficult for people to register to vote, but the good news is people are kind of overcoming those obstacles. But the challenge right now are things that I'm sure we'll talk about later, like the state election board taking over county election administration, and again presenting obstacles for people in precincts where there are a lot of voters from having options that they need to get out there and vote.
Martha, final word on this.
There are no obstacles to voting in Georgia. If you look at us compared to other states, there are no obstacles. And the number one way that people registered to vote was through Motor Voter. And while I support all the things we do at grocery stores to register to vote in other places, the number one way was by interfacing with people when they got their driver's license, which was a bipartisan effort.
All right, folks, we will leave it there. Thank you. Coming up, Republicans who want to oust Senator Raphael Warnock on the attack about Afghanistan. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Saigon 2.0, that's how Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black describes the situation in Afghanistan. He and other Republican candidates called on Senator Raphael Warnock to call for the resignation of top military officials. Black says President Biden and Democrats like Senator Warnock are failing to keep Americans safe. Theron, how tough of a situation is this for Senators Warnock and Ossoff?
Well, it's a tough one, but I want to read something that Senator Warnock said this week, Lori, and shout out to the Atlanta Press Club. They had a really good luncheon. But when asked this question, Senator Warnock said, we've been in a 20-year endless war. Like most Americans and most Georgians, I think that these endless wars have not served us well. And then lastly, Lori, he went on to say, as we move forward, there will be plenty of time to talk about an exit. But this is the one thing I think that's so important. He also stressed that we need to make sure that we focus on getting the Americans out of Afghanistan and also the Afghan allies out of there safely. And so ultimately, this is something that Republicans are going to try to attack U.S. senators all across the country that are Democrats who are coming up for election. But ultimately, I think the senator's approach to this and his message was the right one as we move forward.
Phil, I see you shaking your head.
Well, that is a bunch of BS what Senator Warnock said. You know, we're going to talk about the exit later. Let's talk about it now when you have people dying. This is an epic catastrophe by the Biden administration, and you've got a clueless and incompetent president that should be called out by Democrats. I would hope the Democrats on this panel would call out. The country comes first here rather than party. And the fact that Warnock's worried about endless wars, I'm afraid this disaster where you have scenes of people falling off of planes that they're trying to cling to them to leave, that's going to be emblazoned here in the history books for the future. I think you're going to have our kids and grandkids fighting endless wars because of this catastrophe. This evacuation was not planned out, and I think that you're going to see politically a backlash between the Democrats. Already the Democrat House Armed Services Committee chairman, to his credit, is blasting this. And it's not just Republicans, Lori, that are criticizing this. I think you're going to see the national mood of embarrassment. This is a total surrender to radical Islam.
Martha, before I get to you, I just want to ask Kathy, what is the political fallout for Georgia Democrats on this one?
I don't think it's going to be quite as dire as Phil says. I think that most Georgians want an end to the war, want our soldiers out of Afghanistan. And remember, this has been 4 presidents in the making. I think that the Trump administration and Republicans are going to have a hard time living down pictures of Mike Pompeo negotiating with the Taliban just a short time ago. I'm the first to say that the ending of this, or the evacuation of people, is an unmitigated disaster and needs to be addressed in some way. And certainly we need to unpack what happened that led to what I think is a miscalculation. But honestly, I don't think there's anybody that's surprised at where we are right now, really. And again, let's just remember this started under a Republican administration and has been going on for 20 years. I think Biden took one for the team, and unfortunately, it hasn't gone well.
Martha, I mean, something that we have seen Republicans and Democrats agree on is taking care of the Afghan refugees. Governor Kemp basically saying that they are welcome here in Georgia.
Well, look, shame for saying this started under a Republican president. That has nothing to do with it, the party of the president that went into Afghanistan. 9/11 is why we went into Afghanistan. And the bottom line is, it is shameful that our 2 senators, where Georgia is in one of the top states as far as casualties, either people that lived here or people that came through our bases, and not one word has been said by either of the senators about that sacrifice. And that is shameful, and it is very difficult for people to hear. So the problem is, yes, most people wanted to get out of Afghanistan. I agree with that, but you get your civilians out first, your equipment second, and the troops last. And I'll close with this. A week ago, we had 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. Today, we have 10,000, and probably by the end of next week, with who's been called up to try to get the strike forces out, it'll be more than that. That is not a drawdown. So we need to call it what it is.
Theron?
Listen, I think Martha said something very important, and that is that she agrees that we should actually withdraw out of Afghanistan, that she explained the process. And I think that's where the argument lies. But let's not forget, Lori, that former President Donald Trump was trying to actually take credit for encouraging, the president of the United States and also his attempts to leave Afghanistan unsuccessfully, right? And so I think we probably all agree that this 20-year war, which I back up Kathy, was started under President Bush, and it was the right thing to do because we basically had been attacked. Our homeland had been attacked, and we had to respond. But to be there 20 years, President Biden had to do something. And now what I think we have to do is communicate with the American people and Georgians and our 2 U.S. senators to make sure they do that, to say, hey, this is the process. And I just want to clarify one thing. What Senator Warnock said at this press club event, Lori, was not that he didn't believe that we should not focus on the exit. What he's saying is that the exit is a process, right? And it's a process that's going to be ongoing. But right now, what he was very, very specific about was that we got to get Americans out of there and we got to get our Afghan allies. And so ultimately, I believe that these 2 U.S. senators from Georgia definitely are pro-American. They definitely want to make sure that our American allies, and American people and our Afghan allies are out of there, and then ultimately to move on from this endless war.
Phil, you've been raising your hand, but I really do want to get to this issue of welcoming these Afghan refugees to Georgia, because it was much different when you had the Syrian refugee crisis. Back when Governor Deal was governor, he opposed federal efforts to relocate them to Georgia. What do you think is different really this time around?
Well, I will say this about Warnock and Senator Ossoff, the 2 Democrats. They didn't say hardly anything until Warnock said something last Thursday at the Atlanta Press Club, which was a really nothing speech. And, Theron actually makes a better explanation than Warnock did. I mean, the exit strategy ought to be examined in hearings in Congress, for example. With regard to the refugees, it goes back to the horrible decisions that Biden made, starting with the closing down of that air base on July 4th. That was crazy. Trump would never have done that. I was for withdrawal too, but you have to have smart withdrawal and you have to have a smart way to destroy all of the equipment. Martha laid out that scenario very correctly. And with regard to refugees, Trump had a plan in place with third-party Arab countries where we could be evacuating these Afghanis that were allied with the United States. We don't always have to have them come here. Yes, I'm not opposed to certain vetted interpreters, and that might be a few thousand people, but I think other Arab countries are probably a better way to go, and like Qatar and some other Mideast countries.
All right, we'll be discussing this topic, I'm sure, for weeks to come as well. So thank you, everybody. Coming up, the Atlanta City Council tables a decision on a new police training facility. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
After more than 4 hours of public comment, the Atlanta City Council decided to table a proposal to lease land to the Atlanta Police Foundation for a new law enforcement and fire training center. Kathy, after the events of the past year, the one issue that both sides seem to agree on is more training for law enforcement. But opponents of this training center, they don't like the proposed location. So my question is, what's wrong with the proposed location?
Well, the proposed location is in land that's in DeKalb County, but owned by the city of Atlanta, that has long been planned to be additional park space in the city of Atlanta. So to use that as a training facility that wouldn't be accessible to the people who desperately need this additional green space is another broken promise by the city of Atlanta if it goes through. You know, we do these planning things with lots of citizen engagement. We come up with all these these kind of future-looking plans, and then at the drop of the hat, we change them and do something else. And this is just another one of those examples. So people are rightfully very upset about it. I'm glad the council tabled it. Of course, there's an election coming up, so it's kind of no surprise there. But people will be held accountable if they move forward in this location. We own land in Dawson County. We own land in Fulton County. We own land in lots of places around the city of Atlanta that could be used for this purpose. But not there. That's not the right place.
Phil.
Well, the Atlanta Police Foundation has graciously said they wanted to lease it. None of this will be taxpayers' money, basically. There'll be private funding. I understand some of Kathy's concerns, but the the way it went, the compromise that has evolved is that all the trees would be replaced, the acreage was reduced for the facility. There was a lot of compromises that were made for this, and it should have been passed. We've had over 25 hours of public comments from both sides, and the liberals were yelling for police training last year, and now you've got someone like Councilwoman Madeline Archibong, who, by the way, voted to defund the police. She's trying to torpedo this just because she's anti-police. I think we need to go forward with this and get the training facility for the police and fire, and it would boost their morale.
Darren, what do you think the future holds for this facility?
I mean, you just listen to the debate between Kathy and Phil. I mean, I think both Kathy and Phil make some really good points. I think the thing here is you have to be honest with our viewers, and that it was the timing. I mean, it literally was going on the week of qualifying, right? So if you're an incumbent city council member, you definitely don't want to draw an opponent on this. And then even if, to Kathy's point, it's going to have to be voted on. And I think ultimately what the council members have said, Lori, is that they want more information. They want to take a deeper dive into this. But I make a bold prediction. I think you're going to see both sides come to the table after the qualifying week is over and you know who's running for what. And they're going to have to be some realistic compromise at either this location or another location. But I will say this, and Phil is right. We all agree that we need more police training, and we just need a better training facility to retain the officers and the public safety men and women who put their lives on the lines for us every single day. And so I think it's going to definitely happen. We need a public safety facility. We're just not sure on the location yet.
All right, Martha, let's move on to another important issue. A bipartisan panel is now in place to investigate Fulton County's handling of the November election. Many are calling this a first step in the state taking over Fulton County elections. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it may be the first step because there are multiple steps. You know, people are trying to mobilize folks, trying to say, oh, this is the end of the world. But there are multiple steps, and it may ultimately go to that. But I continue to use the example of Broward County down in Florida. They implemented a similar type plan in Florida's elections. They went through the process. They took over Broward County. Broward County went from being the one that was always last to count to where Florida's results came in at 9:30 on election night. So sometimes a county like Fulton County, even when I was growing up in Atlanta many years ago, Fulton County was always in the news for slow elections. It needs to be done. This is the first step. They're going through the proper process, and it may end up with a takeover. It may not.
Kathy, what about the critics of Fulton County who point to those long lines and delayed results that have been going on for years?
Well, I think we're always going to be concerned about that. This is the largest county in the state, and there's always going to be challenges getting enough resources out there to help people vote. And I'd be the first one to say, I'd like to see a little more stability over there, but it hasn't been helped by the politicizing of the situation. And let's be really clear, this is a majority Democratic district. It is a majority black district, and the panel that is looking at this has one Democrat on it. The majority of the people on the panel are Republicans, and all of them are white. It is hard to convince anybody on its face that this is a fair look over in terms of what they're trying to do here. And until you kind of understand the optics of it, you're going to have a hard time convincing people that your intentions are good.
All right,
the challenge, though, just one quick point. The challenge is the slow counties across the country are always controlled by Democrats. And so we've got to get to the bottom of this and how to fix it.
All right, we have to leave it there. Sorry, everybody. We'll be discussing it. Don't worry. All right, everyone, coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Phil, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'll make my winner this performance review panel that we've been talking about for Fulton County to get better elections. Even the Democrat, Kathy, I would remind you, on the performance board, it says that Fulton County has had these problems from chain of custody broken to mismanagement, to long lines, to delays for 25 years. This is not something that Republicans have just dreamed up over the last couple of years. Also, the loser is former Mayor Kasim Reed and his supporters. This was disrespectful for their supporters to be booing Felicia Moore, an opponent in the mayoral race, on qualifying day. That was just disrespectful.
Kathy.
Let's see, my winner's Alex Wan, who used to represent Atlanta City Council District 6, decided to get in when the council member declined to run again. He'll be a good addition as a former Finance Committee chair as we shape up a new government next year. Also, winner Carolyn Bordeaux for her legislation to create ways to repurpose dying shopping centers, shopping malls. We've got them all over the region, and I appreciate her attention to this.
All right, Theron, over to you. We've got about a minute 30.
All right, I want to make a winner, Councilwoman Jennifer Odd. Kathy just mentioned that she's got some candidates running to replace her in the City Council, so definitely want to thank her for her service. She will be there until the end of the year. Also want to make DeKalb County and the Atlanta Hawks a winner. As I mentioned, we mentioned earlier on the show, Lori, they vaccinated 1,100 plus people in DeKalb County, so that was a big win for that county. And then lastly, want to give a big shout out to Vera Smith, who works at Park Tavern in Midtown. She watches the show, so I want to give her a big shout out, and also Paul Smith, who's the owner.
All right, hello to both of them. And Martha, about 50 seconds left.
My winner this week, I got welcomed at the Rabun County GOP with a giving my message of what we do next. It was great to see them this week. My losers, the Georgia Department of Labor. We have gone to pre-pandemic employment levels, but the offices across the state are still closed. I'm getting calls all the time about it. Mark Butler needs to do something about it or step aside.
All right, and Phil, real quick, a few seconds left. Herschel Walker news.
Well, he has set up a team of consultants. So you've heard me say on the show that he's going to run. So this is the last step before some sort of announcement comes.
All right, well, you heard it here first. Thanks, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.